Please silence or shut off your cell phones if you would, and please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, and we do have some additions. Melanie, would you like to go with additions, please?
Yes, we have a residential disposal fee form and a scaled per care base.
And do we have any deletions? None at this time.
Yes, take it back. The minutes that I'm working on recovering.
Okay, so those, we'll hold off on those. We do those tomorrow then, probably. At the end of the day, I'd like to add discussion, considering a letter to the governor for the DEA appointment. So at the end of the day, I'd like to add that. Yeah. All right. And any other additions or deletions from the board? There being none, we'll move right on, and we have, let's go on into the season update. Who's first? Barry. Welcome.
Thanks. Barry Schulmer, Area Agency Fire Staff Officer, Fremont National Forest and Lake Condition BLM. Every year we give you a pre and post fire season briefing, and this is the post season briefing. Just want to kind of talk about the fire season a little bit about the field treatments that we're doing out there on the landscape across many of the agencies, and the partnership that we have here in South Central Oregon. To summarize briefly, 2018 fire season, if we think back to this summer, we had several days of smoke, and lots of it. And unfortunately, we were surrounded by the fires down in Redding, the fires to the west of us, Grants Pass, and then our own Watson Creek fire there towards the end in late August, or mid-August. So depending on which way the wind blew, we were getting smoke from somewhere that kept us socked in here several days. And so it was a tough year for many of the public folks, as far as and all of us who had to breathe that air. But unfortunately, that's how wildfire happens sometimes, and we have less control of that. What we do have control of is prescribed fire, and we try to do that, when we have those right forecasts and we know which way the wind's going to blow and things like that. So.
I'm going to hold you up for a second. Melanie, you want to explain why just real fast for the people that don't know what's going on with our monitor?
So we have a new app that records the session, and then eventually we might use it to let people Skype in, kind of a technology that's available, but right now I'm just recording these
So that's
guys.
the reason why you do.
Yeah. And I can turn that off, but sometimes that monitor doesn't always want to turn on very easily,
So this is the first day we've done it. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sorry.
All good. The second thing I want to bring up is our fire season in general was very slow here in South Central Oregon. We were 100 fires short of average. So
We're not going to complain about that.
yeah, so we had one good lightning bust that you can see on some of this data here, but we covered all of them and did a really good job with that. But as far as total number of lightning fires, we were way down for this year.
We didn't have the letter, but
Yeah, a lot of clear days. The information that I have in front of you here, just kind of shows where all the fires belong. I will mention that 981S is Klamath ODF and 982 is Lake ODF, so that everybody knows. Another big theme that you will see as you come through this is that we had again a fair amount of human caused fires. It continues to be something that we deal with on a pretty regular basis, and we even had a fire this last weekend where we killed 3/4 of an acre. So, it's very dry. I think if you think back to the last year, we didn't have much of a winter, and So that led us into the summertime, and some of the larger fuels that we have were drier than people maybe expected. So to leave, or to way they normally do some burning or have a campfire or things like that, you know, whether they were left unattended or whatnot, for one reason or another, we're out there dealing with some huge house fires. It certainly added up. I'm just thumbing through here. You can see in July we had a peak of 149 fires, but this is all minuscule compared to 2017. If you remember 2017, we were way above average. So, but we were ready for the workload. We certainly had the firefighters here in South Central Oregon. We did ramp up when we needed to, but what wound up happening a lot is that we wound up helping our neighbors as much as anything, because the Rogue River, Siskiyou, and some of the other forests around obviously were busy, and just what we weren't doing here in South Central. If you scroll back down to fires by district, there it's got some red bars. It's quite a ways through there. I just like to remind folks, kind of our lightning belt is the Bly and Choquin area. And if you see Bly that is only sitting on 9 fires, that indicates that we were in a really slow year. So Choquin had a very slow year as well. We all did, really. So, the desert out in Fort Rock had certainly some lightning there that caused 34 fires out there. But all in all, pretty quiet season. Any questions so far? I think the highlight of the season was the Watson Creek fire. As you all know, this fire is still under investigation, and so I can't really comment on it. But a lot of good work has been done there as far as suppressing the fire. We used 3 fuel breaks that were created throughout the different phases. If you think back to the 28 road and some of the main roads that had fuel removed from the sides about 150 feet in, that turned out to be a positive for us and helped us hold the fire, keeping it north of the 28 road. That was a big deal. Also, a prescribed burn that we just did at Coffee Pot Flat this last spring and the previous fall turned out to be a success there as far as holding fire up flat. And then over on the north side and a little bit to the east is the Withers piece above the Withers Ranch there. That turned out to be a success as well. So, the unfortunate part is we did burn a fair amount of private property, the Green Diamond in the middle of it there. And those folks are busy hauling those logs off as they can. Unfortunately, some of those aren't that old, so there's limited amount that they're going to be able to get from that. But that's millions of dollars out of their pocket, and that's unfortunate.
A lot of those were those old warehouses or 40-year-old clerks just starting to grow.
And they did have some mixed severity as well that I learned from them last week as well. So they did have some crown runs in some of that regen, but when they got into some of their bigger stuff, they did lay down and kind of do more of an underburn in different places. All in all, though, we're working hard on the Watson Creek fire to salvage on the forest as well. NEPA is ongoing as we speak, and we're hoping to have some NEPA signed here hopefully in the month of November. As far as getting those logs off and to them. So.
Well, I got the chance to visit with Ranger McKay this day, and I think it'd be really good I'm hoping he's able to share some information on the NEPA and so forth. I think you're right on the money. I don't know where you're at in your presentation, but I will want to say just a couple of quick things. Living in Paisley, being impacted, the citizenry there, as well as Summer Lake and the surrounding area, that, and these kind of things, sometimes they end up being
pat people on the back, but the reality, in my opinion, in closing out with the fire team as well that you brought in, which they did an outstanding job with the local unit, the interagency, fire force, all of you, Forest Service, BLM, state, Fish and Wildlife. The whole process is as good as I've ever seen it. And the firefight itself, while us citizens don't go out there, it was very obvious that every effort was being put in to minimize the damage that was being done and get that thing out as quickly as possible. And then I think when Ranger McKay talks about the follow-up to that from our visit last week relative to being able to utilize as much as possible, my hat's off to all of you and the fine work that you've done and continue to do in rehabbing this and taking care of a bad situation and making it one that's tolerable. So,
Takes a lot of work. We spend a lot of time in the off-season, as you know, all 5 agencies that our dispatch center dispatches for, and we, like right now, we're getting ready to review the 2018 fire season. We're going to see what worked, what we can improve on, and then we take that into our meetings in January, February, March, leading up to the 2019 fire season. And we make those adjustments, and everybody's at the table, everybody has a say, and it really makes me proud to be part of this group, because I look around to some other places in the state, and they got a long way to go.
oh yeah.
And we really are making a difference on the landscape by being close to forces concept and working together.
Well, and just another quick comment, and I don't know if, when I said all those agencies, I see Mike back there, I want to make sure I said the state because they were big players in this from the outset. But it goes beyond the firefighting. You know, you folks are starting to bleed over into a lot of interagency work as far as the management of the resource, whether it's the Forest Service land or not, and you're to be commended there. And to your point, this is known as one of the very few areas that has their act pretty well together, working and trying to maximize the limited number of resources you have in your different agencies. So once again, good job.
Well, thank you.
I got a question for you. Where's the force as far as developing an agreement with the Rangeland Fire Protection Agency?
Yeah, so we have the new RFPA up in Summer Lake, Valley Falls, and they're just on board this year. They've got quite a workforce and quite a group, and we're looking forward to working with them more in the future. So we also work with Warner Valley, RFPA, and then we also have some in the extreme North Lake County as well.
As far as agreements go, I think Bob had something.
Yeah, I can, if you don't mind, Barry, I'll speak a little bit to that point. So we're fortunate in Oregon and Washington that we have somebody at the State Office Regional Office that's been identified to help on the federal side, as well as with ODF to help stand up, improve, train, and help develop the rangeland associations, and Brent Meisinger, who did work here. So we could see early on in the onset of Watson Creek some things that we would like to change, just because our culture is we want to play in the sandbox with as many forces as we can and leverage them, as long as we can make that something we can stand up to. And so we will probably be, our efforts are going to be pointed towards being probably the first and only forest in Oregon and Washington in which we will try to have an accomplished agreement or MOU, so that we can accept and have the rangeland associations, both Warner Valley and High Desert, where they can bleed into the Forest Service lands to provide help in that effort too. So that's not done, but that's certainly some of our winter work and goal towards that end state.
Have it ready for next year.
Yep, that's our goal.
Okay. I'm going to just direct you to the last 2 pages. Second to last page is some of the Northwest statistics as of October 4th. Obviously those grew a little bit after Klondike Fire had an east wind event and continued on. Eric Nerr just got back from Klondike. His Type 2 incident management team just spent 2 weeks there, and So everybody's still recovering from his team of a late and long fire season, so it's been a toll on a lot of firefighters, so. As you can see, the costs though, one of the last bullets there on that second to last page, you know, just in the Northwest, we're looking at $511 million there, so, or $681 million altogether, so. You know, it's big money, it's a big cost, and it does chew up the pocketbook.
So Barry, does anybody try and analyze, is where you've got these bear teams out there and we do all of the post-fire rehab and evaluation? We always talk about the suppression cost on an annual basis, not just in the Northwest, but nationally. But not too many people talk about that valuable resource that's lost and how much value is there.
How much came back?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's just tremendous.
Well, and everybody's got to keep in perspective as well. When you look at the total number of acres burned, you know, we're not talking about complete black either. You know, there is a lot of mosaic wildfires out there, and some of them actually do some good. Use, you know, some burning that we normally wouldn't have done because they're in tough locations and things like that.
Well, I think, as you know, I had the opportunity to take Congressman Holden out last week, and he was very amazed, and we even talked to Commissioner Mike Albertson at the dinner that night, took a lot of pictures, and he's going to be sharing those directly with the president. But the view, Ranger McKay and Force Supervisor Barry Emler opened the district up. So we took a little ride over the weekend up into it, and you're exactly right. And I think people need to see that there is a lot of mosaic, there is a lot of lower intensity fire that more replicates prescribed or natural fire. But just a quick little comment. I asked last year in June when you were doing your preseason about campfires. I don't think my campground or my camping area, we have to worry about it doing anything. It is total black, as well as my wood gathering area. Nothing left.
So of the 59,000 acre fire, about 22,000 met that mosaic.
Yeah.
So you can see kind of the balance there.
You mentioned earlier that some of the pre-treatment helped substantially. And there's this person in Bend who claims that pre-treatment doesn't help and all that, but I think you guys proved that it does. Now, on the committee I was on a year or so ago about with the smoke management, is that going to help you guys if they ever get the rules instituted?
It does give us a little more flexibility. We talked about, you know, the current rules of, you know, how long we have a intruding into a SRA, smoke sensitive receptor area.
It's like this.
Yeah, and so now if we have just a 1 hour intrusion, it will not count as an intrusion. So, very typically, we burn here in Lake County. Let's say we're burning out west of Lakeview. You may start out the day with the fire going to the north, to the northwest, but by the end of the day, the frontal has changed and you have more of a westerly flow. And you may see that smoke come through the valley at the end of the day. That happens. It's hard for us to get much done. It's hard to get much accomplished if you get only stay with forecasts that have wind going one direction. So we're not, you know, intentionally, if the smoke is the forecast that it's going to blow from west to east and it's going to blow straight at Lakeview, we don't burn that. You know, things like that. So, but if we do and it has a chance at the very end of the day for an hour to intrude, you know, that may be a chance that we can take.
I have to say, I appreciate talking about the mosaic and everything, but back to Commissioner Shannon talking about the resource. These fires aren't normal. This fire is huge. Back in the day, mosaic with a 5,000 acre fire is one thing, but when we're talking 60, 70,000 acres, then you talk 25, 30% of whatever. We're losing a lot of resource out there. That's a lot of timber that's getting burned up. So for those of us that we reside in these communities that are such a high percentage of public lands that need to be managed and used for jobs, economic side of it. Those numbers are huge to me as well. So I appreciate that this fire had a little bit different fire behavior, and some of the work was done, it's great, but it's pretty still, the wounds are still pretty open on Berry Point fire. It didn't have near the mistake that this one had. So that's the way things are going right now. It's making things very fun. We're losing a lot of resource out there. So I do see quite a value in knowing what we're losing. For us to be able to argue politically towards Congressman Walden, Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden, this is what we're losing out here. Not only the cost of the fire, but we're losing that resource, and it's not going to be back for years. You know, I know that's not your guys' job to have to really look at that, but.
Well, it leads into, you know, that next talking point. The forest is, Fremont Monima is 2.3 million acres. Addition Field is 3.5 million acres. Sheldon Park is another very large number. We all have values on that, whether it's grazing, timber, you know, whatnot. All the agencies and the state are working hard to reduce those fields. And so the forest again is leading the region in acre street. We did it again this year, so.
And I did want to belittle that anyhow.
Yeah.
We appreciate that work.
I would be more red-faced if I was sitting here today and we weren't doing it.
Right.
But we're working really hard. We're taking advantage of, you know, all the resources we can to treat the landscape. It's just, we got a daunting task ahead of us, and not every acre is treatable because of terrain, wilderness, things like that. That old red and dead or gray and dead, or whatever you want to talk about, you know, we still got another large chunk there that hasn't burned. It's going to be a problem.
It's very dead anyway.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, on the big beaver kill, what percentage of that large block was encompassed in this?
Well, that was a 59,000 acre fire, I believe. We determined, I'd have to ask Major McKay, but we still
About
got
20%, more than 20%.
Yeah, so.
Not an insignificant
So we still
number.
have 80%.
Well, that's the
If
other
there
side.
wasn't a good hold there on the south end of Watson, that fire potentially could have went all the way to Highway 140.
Yeah, we have wind chains there that really play against it.
So I guess now as good as any time, these fires, like you said, they're getting to be quite large across our nation and everything. And us as commissioners said on several different things. One thing that really came to me, I'm very involved in transportation at the ODOT level. And sat through some interviews last week for District 11 manager. And several of those people applying for that job, some of the biggest problems they have is these fires getting down to an interstate or getting down to state highway and having to close these roads and state highways, right on down to county roads and everything. And I know you guys work well with all other agencies, but today sort of come where they're going to have to be at the table a little bit more, because then their services cannot get to those communities or ambulances and all different things. And it's really interesting to me that it's become one of their biggest challenges is these fires coming down and shutting down an interstate or a state highway. And there's many players whenever that happens, from the local fire people that want to shut it down to the federal agencies and everything. So I know you said at the table with a lot of different agencies, but that one there might have to be kicked up a little bit. Maybe or maybe not. I don't know how much you set with ODOT, but it's interesting because we interviewed 6 and there's 4 of them who mentioned that was one of their biggest challenges that they had to deal with. So just information for you to think about.
We have had, you know, with ODOT, we worked pretty close with them in Schmaltz, Klamath County there, and we did some prescribed burning rate in the PD in Schmaltz. And they put it on the reader board, they put up extra reader boards, things like that. We obviously had the reader board close to Lakeview for Watson Creek and whatnot, and they did have to close the highway there at one time. You know, things were a little bit busy, but, you know, we generally have had very good success with it.
Yeah, I guess a good is to know what their plans are if they have to shut that down, because then they have to have the detour routes that sometimes take in the forest roads, have to get people around the communities and everything. So they have pretty good plans in place. but maybe there hasn't been that cross communication for whenever that does happen. Just something that, our area here is really, as far as I'm concerned, premier, as Commissioner Shallum says, it's just something that might be another tool in your toolbox.
When you talk about that too, you gotta give kudos to our sheriff department and our state police who did a great job there when we had to do the local evacuation in certain places. They were very on the spot and very, to the point and very responsible. So appreciate that.
Sorry if I took you, so
No, it's-
I'm gonna blame it on Commissioner Shallum.
So, with that, I'll pass it on to anybody else that wants to talk unless you have any questions for me.
They're not all jumping up.
That's quiet,
Would you all like to hear any more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll take that seat. Y'all can call me Doug. I'm looking around the room every time you say Ranger today.
Yeah.
Welcome, then.
Thanks. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Watson Creek Fire and I think what it meant for us and the county, the community, and for the nation moving forward. I think everyone knows it started on the 15th of August. We were in planning level 5, which meant there weren't a lot of resources available. And that fire started in a really bad place. That Winter Rim area is one of the most complex topographic features for fighting fire. It's definitely, in my opinion, a fire-prone area because we've had fires there. I've been here 3 years, we've had one on that rim every year. Between Paisley and Picture Rock Pass. And then you guys know more than I do the history there with the toolbox and the winter and other things. You can see those scars as you drive around the lake up there. And that's probably not going to change. My guess is it'll intensify in the future. So we can be expecting fires to occur along that winter rim for the foreseeable future. Complexity there has to do with the topography. You have a 2,000 to 3,000 foot elevated plateau, that escarpment right next to those dry lake beds, and so you get really strong winds. And since it is a crescent-shaped feature, you have its deeply incised canyons coming down from all different directions. You get wind directions coming north, south, east, and west almost simultaneously. And then at night, in the summer, late summer in particular, you get an almost sundowner type effect with warm winds, warm air rising up off that lake bed and pulling the cool air down off the rim. So we got really lucky with this fire. That was not a factor. We were terrified at the beginning that was going to be a factor. So a lot of work went into keeping it up on the rim and not getting down into down to the highway, and then being available for those winds to pull it up and hit it down in a kind of sawing motion up towards Summer Lake. That said, one of the things that Barry mentioned was we had a road that had 150 foot on either side clearance that we dropped retardant on, and that fire went through it like crap. It didn't slow it down one bit. So retardant was not really holding, and since it started at the northern end of that red dead zone where you had just a massive amount of dead and down debris, it looked like pickup sticks in there, we couldn't really go direct. Equipment couldn't really get in there. We tried, but had to keep pulling people out because it's too intense. And then we couldn't get a hand crew in there. So we had to adopt another strategy. And I should throw in that the smoke from the fire laid down over it, so aircraft was in limited use. We decided basically to box and burn it, so we dropped back to some well-known points along the roads, and we started dropping green trees to create fire break, and then we burned out. And so we made the fire bigger to keep it from getting huge. And we had limited resources at first, and I want to give some kudos when we did start to burn out. There was a request from the team to use the local folks, our interagency Skifon burners, because they're probably the best that you're going to find in this area. And a lot of the success of this is based on our BLM and state and forest service and other resources who have the experience doing prescribed burning. They were able to catch that fire, they were able to keep it running. Also, another key item for success was the past NEPA work that the forest has done and the treatments we had done, the fuels treatments on the northeast edge of that fire, and as Barry said, on the southeast edge. That fire kept trying to hook and get into the river canyon so it could run into Paisley. It finally got away from us for a moment down there on the southeast edge by Coffee Pot Flat, and it was running and gunning. It hit that prescribed fire we did last spring, and it fell on its own face. It just fell down. And it was really a beautiful thing to watch. So I guess the stories are that the work that we do, thinning and burning, really do make the forest a safer place for everyone, and it also helps manage it for the inevitable wildfires that are going to come, and more will be coming. Really good stories that came out of this is that we reached out, the incident command team and all the key players from Skifon reached out to the public on a daily basis. We had just turned out about 2,500 head of cattle up there a week or two before. And as you know, they don't want to leave. Once they've been turned out, they're supposed to be there. So we worked with the permittees, and we set up a system to where interacting between our range programs, our resource advisors, the incident command team, and the ranchers, we were able to move those cattle out of harm's way before we did burnout operations to stop the fire. And it was highly successful. And we had daily meetings with them. And that was for me, that was a key component, something that I wanted to convey to the local community, is that we serve you and what your concerns are. So we had a big concern with private timber. We had a big concern with federal timber and its impact of losing that on the local economy and on grazing. So we had a bear team come in. They did their analysis. We pushed forward with a process, and we come up with 5 different categorical exclusions under the National Environmental Policy Act for post-fire salvage and for restoration of that ground. In addition to that, we did a review of an existing NEPA for an unburned portion of timber that was in there. And that I signed last week. I'm looking to public scoping will be completed by the 13th of November on those additional 5 CEs, and I'll be signing that on the 15th.
Thank you.
So the out of deuce, that dog timber sale portion of that burn, so we have 250 acres of that will be salvaged under a categorical exclusion. The unburned portion of that will be moved forward with a timber sale under that review of the, it's called an SIR. Just more acronyms, the Forest Service has tons of them, but anyways, just a review. In addition to that, we're going to be dropping hazard trees along all the major roads out there and trails, around our campgrounds, around, and this is key, because I have to manage a lot of rangeland here, around our fences that we're going to be rebuilding. The fire suppression activities burned up 17 miles of fence, and we'll be replacing that.
Is that just the outer perimeter or interior fencing?
Is interior as well. Is anywhere that our suppression activities burned up the fire, burned up fencing. And so we'll be dropping hazard trees in that area so the crews will have a safe place. And then also the extra benefit from that is there'll be fewer trees to drop on fences, which is a big issue for the local rangers here. As you heard me say earlier, part of our strategy was to, since we couldn't go direct, was to go indirect, and we dropped a lot of green trees. We were able in suppression repair to get those trees decked. And so part of the salvage that will be coming out of this is that we separated the merchantable from the non-merchantable. The non-merchantable will be available for firewood, and the merchantable will be sold along with the salvage part of dog and the regular part of the dog timber sale, and then whatever else we can get from dropping the roadside hazard trees. So that'll be 150 foot either side of those roads that are out there, and then we will even include some of the level ones down to level ones, so it's going to be quite a bit of work going on, but it'll be a lot safer out there. And all of that will be going to the market that is merchantable anymore. Not all of it will be. So there's going to be a lot of firewood up there.
So Doug, because this is going to be reported on, and I think it's great that the discussion can be out there. Just a real quick clarifier, or I believe we should clarify, when you talked about dropping the green trees, and particularly on the 28 road, I know Green Diamond was very busy doing that, but they took those trees out of the fire area, and those are going to be salvaged in most cases. I think that Green Diamond on the area I'm thinking of, they weren't burned up, they weren't just dropped and burned up. So we just need that out there so people know we did have that in mind as we were making those fire breaks.
Right.
And on the second part of that, on the 28 road from Elder Creek going back up north, with winter, we think coming on, are they going to get a lot of those small decks that they did, on the little bit steeper cut banks out of there so that they're not plugging up those drainage ditches? Right now, there's a fair amount of material in there. If you do get some good moisture, there's no place for it to go.
Right, the short answer is yes. That's the
Okay.
design. That's why we wanted to get the NEPA out as quickly as possible. But I'd like to say that from the initial attack, from when the fire first started until these post-fire salvage and restoration, NEPA will be signed, will be 90 days. So we're trying to use all of the tools that Congress has given us. But in addition to that, part of the restoration, we'll be doing recreation work. We're going to realign a portion of that NRT trail that burned up and put it in a little bit better spot. So
When you said the empty trail, talking about now, the recreation trail.
Right. And we're going to be planting 15,000 acres in Ponderosa Pond. And no, we will not be planting any lodgepole. So
It will take care of itself.
Right.
Thank you.
they come in themselves.
And so one of the things, if you look at this fire, and we never really want to have a fire like this, but when we do, and trying to make the best of it, is that using the suppression strategies that the team used, it really was a pretty reasonable cost. It averaged out about $300 an acre is what the fire costs were, which are significantly less than what most large fires are. They're running closer to about $1,000 an acre. And a lot of that was because we couldn't use a lot of retardant, and we didn't need as much equipment because we couldn't go as direct initially. So all of those saved money, but it was, I think, the collaborative spirit of the public and the team to work to make sure we had over $5 million worth of cattle that we were herding through there while we were trying to do burnout operations, while we were dropping trees and planning all the while to do a salvage to try to get as much value for the public out of what was being damaged. So we are going to be planting ponderosa, which are more drought tolerant, hopefully help shade out any of the lodgepole. And it's a pretty good strategy in this country, I think, a suppression strategy to try to fall back to some key points where we can and burn out. We got the fire out pretty quickly. We got it out relatively cheaply, and now we're starting we'll sell the timber that we can out of it, and we'll replant and plan for a better forest in the future. We're going to be reconstructing fences that were lost. We've got livestock grazing component, and right now I'm not looking at limiting turnout.
So next year there'll be a positive turnout.
Oh yeah, that's what we're planning on right now.
And I'd like to commend on the, you mentioned several times about salvaging what you can. It's always, I spent 21 years with the Forest Service, 14 on the land, 8-day logging, which was a little excessive at times. But the timber out there is actually owned by the people of the United States. And for us, we do have a responsibility to make use of that for the overall good of the timber industry, to build houses and so forth. So I appreciate that.
Good. Even though we don't want something like this to happen, working together, all of us, Dan was there every day. It was really, I think, they gave us lemons and we made lemonade out of it. So, and I think we should continue that in the future. I really do. I think we should be looking community involvement with your national forest and how we manage it. Let us know what you want.
So it is WOW, and it is Ranger McKinney, because of everything you said, is what we've been wanting to hear for years, sitting up here. All the explanation, everything you said, proactive, using every tool in the toolbox, everything you're talking about, thank you. We've been waiting to hear this for a long time, and there's been different levels, but our team as a whole, what I consider our team as a whole, our agencies here, put them against anybody in the nation, because what you guys do, men and women, and the way you're making things happen. These catastrophic fires are terrible. Working with our landowners as you speak, talking about those fences, those are one of the most volatile things. Salvaging everything you can with them, the tools, getting those green trees. I could go on. Thank you. I just, it's a great day. Thank you guys.
But you're welcome. When I came here, I must admit, I didn't know these things, and so a lot of the people in Paisley, Summer Lake talked with me. I talked with Bob and Dale and everybody, all kinds of people. Mary Jo, the crazy Jew lady, I call her. But I heard all these stories. I heard that the people were upset for lack of communication and stuff like that, and not salvaging. So we wanted to change that because we can, that's what our job is. And also, just so you know, our staffs will be replanting berry bloom this year as well. So we have to, whenever we do replanting, we have to order the plants a year or two ahead. So that happened a year or two ago, and we'll be replanting the berry bloom as well.
Thank you. Very good.
Quick question, you mentioned about maybe reconstruction or realignment of National Recreation Trail. Now, Honda has their Oregon Desert Trail, what they designate, and they included that, which is not in the desert, but so be.
Right.
Are they gonna put their money where their mouth is and help you reconstruct the trail?
They already are.
Excellent.
Them and the Oregon Timber Trail Association as well are two really vital partnerships for us. They're clearing 30 miles or more trail every year. And with them, with their help, now we've got a good chance at a good shot at sustainability and making those trails larger. One of the reasons that we included in the level 1 roads that we have on the forest for dropping trees along them, because they're closed to vehicular traffic, but not to bicycles, foot traffic, and horse traffic. And we want to increase the number of trails. I was able to bring on a recreation person up on the northeast zone and went around this year. And I think we're lined up to really build tourism, sustainable tourism here in Lake County.
This Oregon Timber Trail route would run along.
So I heard everything Commissioner Kestner said there, but just, I heard the word on this national trail. The Board of Commissioners did not support on this trip. We have a letter to the BLM stating that. So if Honda's working with you to be part of the national trail under the forest, I'll speak for myself, let the other two speak, not supporting Honda being part of it, looking into that trail at all.
That's where I've been.
We all have not been supportive of, well, I'll put it this way. I support people getting out and getting to know land and the multiple uses on the lands. Some organizations have different agendas and so forth, but they have already designated in their Oregon Desert Trail that they would use that. So that was suggesting my question, are they going to assist? And we said yes. But we'd like for it to have to be what it is as far as endorsing. Or it's not overly supportive of endorsing that trail.
Copy that.
Yep.
So we're running a little bit late, but we could have a few others probably have something to say, possibly.
Thanks, yeah.
You bet.
We can go another 10 minutes or whatever.
I don't know if you guys want to know what the refuge got planned for
Absolutely.
field stuff or not.
Absolutely.
All right. Drew Taylor, the fire management officer for Sheldon Hart Refuge Complex. So there was a misprint in some of their statistics in there that were handed out. We actually had 1 fire on Hart, 3 on Sheldon, 4 on Sheldon, but not a big deal. So our biggest fire was about 1.5 acres. All 4 of them were lightning caused, no human cause on the refuge, unlike last year with the incident we had with the flare. Other than that, for fuels treatment, pretty much all we're really doing in the last few years is juniper contract cutting, and then we're following up with some burning. So for this year, we got about 3,000 acres of juniper piles to burn on Hart. Just winter, it's all piled. Working with the BLM and some of the Forest Service crews, if we need a hand, they come and help us as well. Waiting to get a window, which we need snow, and it just hasn't quite come yet, I guess. So hopefully we get to it before we get snow down on the top of Hart. But
Next year.
yeah, in the meantime, you know, we're helping out the Forest Service with some underburning. I know my two staff I got left on. Since we're small, we're actually up, I think, helping out on Willow today. We're actually trying to hire a couple more permanent staff right now, as we do some positions, we got to list, I actually got a selection in on one, so we're hoping to up our permanent staff at least, to be able to help out with the interagency partnership. You know, we got just under 1 million acres between the 2 refuges, and it's definitely not the timber, but it's all that sage grouse habitat, which is a big deal. And I could talk to some success on some of the RFPA agreement. I know we had 2 different fires I went on alone, where we got there and RFPA guys were there before we were. One fire was the Buffalo Fire, which was just north of Hart, east of Oriona Canyon. And we actually had probably 12 total RFPA resources out there wanting to help out. About 6 from the Warner Valley and 6 actually from French Glen side. They got tied in with us, coordinated with us good. They were very helpful, and they're coming along really good with the training that the BLM has given them. You know, we've helped out a little bit on that, but it's primarily, you know, the BLM getting those guys trained up, but they are becoming a very valuable asset for us out there in that desert stuff, so.
They have a lot of water tenders that.
They do, yeah, there's more water tenders than we ever see out in the desert, which is nice, so I think we had like 7 or 8 of them out there ready to help. And fortunately, that fire pretty much had put itself out somehow, otherwise that would have been probably at least the size of Watson Creek where it was at with the winds we got later that day, but we kind of got lucky on that one, but the response by the RFPA out there was really good. Plus, Burns districts and us 6 federal engines out there, so I think we got 13 federal engines and a dozen RFPA resources out there, which we don't see that out there that often, that remote, so that was a very good response. So I definitely think RFPA, if we can get that working with the Forest Service, you know, that'd be a good stroke. Those guys, we're getting them trained, they're getting the knowledge, they got a lot of equipment, it just gives us more tools.
I was at a sage grouse conservation meeting in Ontario a couple weeks ago, and the Rangeland Fire Protection Agency subject was one of the keynote presentations. Were you there at that?
Mm-hmm.
But not so much in this area, but east of us, like Hero County, they had a fair number of lightning strikes, but they didn't become the massive habitat loss fires that we have experienced. And the major contribution to that was the local folks, the Rangeland Fire, being able to be on top of them right off the bat,
Yeah.
and keeping them small.
And Warner Valley actually took care of our first fire year on the Sheldon Escarpment in May, because none of my guys were around, and I was in Portland for a meeting, and I get a call from dispatch, and we got a fire out on. And Chuck Messner ran out there with a couple of his guys and put line around it till my guys could get out there the next day. So they are definitely a valuable asset for us out there. So. Anyways, that's all I got. Other than if you guys want to, we got a little bit of rehab going on that Hart fire from last year. Our guys are actually getting ready to actively pick sagebrush seed that we're going to have grown, and then we'll get planted back into that fire start next year, I think. So.
And that's the other thing. This gentleman succeeded a prison and went over in Ontario, grows a lot of sagebrush, because the old practice of just scattering sagebrush had less than 10% success. They were actually growing sagebrush and then transplanting with up to 80% success to try to get sagebrush habitat or sagebrush overall habitat replanted. So you guys are utilizing the local money, I assume?
Yep. Oh, no, I don't know. We got a contract with someone to grow it. We're out picking the seeds to pop off our holes. I'm not sure where it's gone. John knows.
No, we have a private contractor
That doesn't?
that's gonna grow it up.
Excellent.
Well, in farming, I'm getting 100% success, and I don't want it to grow.
So that's all I got. Unless you guys got any more specific questions on the Sheldon Hart stuff. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. Good update.
So commissioners, just one last thing, we forgot to mention, want to bring to attention here coming up next Monday is the Veterans Day, and we're pleased to, you'll get to see in a lot of the media and whatnot, but Lakeview District Crew 7 is going to become the first Veterans hotshot crew.
Outstanding.
And so It's been a couple years in the makings, officially, unofficially, even more than that. But those firefighters and everybody's worked really hard to make this happen. So we will be the first one in the nation as far as a veteran hot shot group.
Very good.
And you folks, you staff, have done a tremendous job in keeping them in front of the people who finally are signing off. Thank you.
You know, I give a lot of credit to Bob.
I know.
Bob's worked really hard.
I know he does. Thank you. It's huge.
I'll tell you what, the hot shot group, when I was first with the Forest Service down with Los Padres on the Bullhead District, I stayed in the hot shot compound, went to a gas place, and they yanked me out one night to go with them. I never want to do that again. I was young and still in shape. Those folks are bad.
So is there anybody else that never got a chance to give us an update?
I can go real quick. Mike Leach, Oregon Department of Forestry, I'm the protection supervisor here in the lake unit. I'll speak for the district as a whole, just benefits off of Florida, helping with the hurricane stuff. You know, I don't want to regurgitate any stats. I will mention the impact to the landowners that I'm paid to protect and the Watson fire. That is big to the landowners that I serve, and they are highly concerned. But I did notice a little cultural shift in the world. I worked with the Green Diamond Group for 9 days on that fire. I was with them every day, and them employing tactics that would make it successful in the end and protect future ownership. They lost the Paisley Winter Wren block for them is their nursery. That was their nursery. They lost 40 years of investment. They were 5 years from first entry, and in our lifetime we will never get to see that entry for most of that ground. They had to make some hard decisions, and they did make those hard decisions to get an end result of the fire being stopped where it was. But it is they are highly concerned. I just went to our annual KFPA board meeting. It comes up. I heard something mentioned earlier, the value assessed or compared to the value of suppression, value lost, value cost of suppression. And I think those figures, we need to figure out how to get those figures out to paint the true picture. The small picture of suppression cost is not painting the total picture, so I'll pass that on from my lender. And then, we talked about, I've heard mentioned the partnership. It is a big deal. I've been involved with it for 25 years here. Sometimes it's hard, but everybody continues to work on the partnership. And honestly, that's how myself as a protection supervisor can be successful, is fostering and continuing that partnership, not just with the government agencies, but we have all types of partnerships going on right now, like in the North Warner project, private landowners and federal agencies to do landscape projects. I'm really excited about where those are going right now. It's a interesting time and where we're at. So that's what I have from Clemens Lake District ODS. If you have any questions, I can probably answer.
Well, I don't, but showing my age, Mike, as you just said, those 40-year-old plantations, I remember being out and about on the Paisley Ranger District when Weyerhaeuser came in and divested itself of all of its in-holdings and planted all of those trees, and to see them go up in smoke it's a tough deal, and I'm sure Green Diamond is feeling that very much, so.
They are, and they're doing what salvage they can. In fact, I'm going to go up there next week, probably a few weeks, just to take a look around, and then they have their planting scheduled 2 years out. They'll go back and, as by law, plant what was lost. So, but they are trying to maximize, what they can get out of that ground. In fact, I know they were harvesting before the team even left, so.
I'd be very interested if time allowed, schedule's allowed to go out there sometime.
Absolutely.
Well, email me or something, see if we can put together a time.
Absolutely, I can do that.
And Green Diamond will be playing Ponderosa, right?
I can't speak for that, I hope they do. I hope they do. So, it was a tough time, but overall it was a success. It's a tough issue.
Yep.
You know, it's monitoring when the wind changed and drove it into their property. And the emphasis with you guys was to protect as much of the private property as possible, but Mother Nature takes its course.
Thank you, Mike.
Did we miss anybody? Thank everybody, thank you so much. Great update.
Thank you all.
Step out real quick. Crowd, thank you. Good team.
Take care.
All right.
Yes.
74 days.
Did you take my meeting while smiling every time?
You're happy. Yeah, he's smiling, man.
It's a grimace.
Yeah.
Okay, so apologize for running a little bit late, but I believe it was justified that we get to hear from federal agencies, state, other agencies. So,
Can you turn that one?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was.
Hi there.
Keith Shepard.
Keith.
Nice to meet you.
Dan Shannon. Nice to meet you too.
so our next item for the audience is update on the Brownsfield project assessment grant that's been awarded to Skoed, actually.
Exactly.
Where it goes to, but I'd like to welcome Keith. And so we're gonna get some people on the phone, apparently. And you got everything else ready to go?
Yeah, everything's ready to rock.
Turning it over to you, Keith.
As soon as Ginger gets Adam on the phone, just a second. I will kind of just mention, I gave each of you a little packet. There's copies of the slides that we're going to be going over today, as well as some information on both EPA and state programs, as well as some related forms that will be distributed during the course of this event.
Hi Adam, this is Ginger. You're online on speakerphone with the commissioners and Keith and a room full of people.
Hey Adam, how you doing?
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for having us today. We're excited to kind of kick things off with the EPA grant. Kind of cover a lot of ground, but at the same time, I want to keep things pretty informal. So if you have questions, comments along the way, feel free to just speak up and we'll address things as they come. This is just kind of a list of things that we're going to go over. First of all, as you all know, I'm Keith Shepard with Cardno. I'm a National Brownfield Practice Leader for Cardno. We're an international consulting firm, about 2,500 folks here in the U.S. A lot of the technical work that's going to be taking place during the course of the grant is going to be done both locally. We're teaming with Anderson Engineering Survey, and also Cardno has offices in Northern California, Seattle, and also Portland. So we're really going to be picking from best available folks to get the work done. Next, we'll talk a little bit about EPA's Brownfield program, kind of hit some of the high notes. This program's been around for quite a while. We'll talk a little bit about how the SCOED's assessment project, which is a coalition assessment grant, will unfold. We'll address the schedule, which is pretty straightforward. And one of the things that I like to do is kind of use these EPA brownfield grants to leverage additional funding and also some private growth. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Oregon, the state of Oregon itself has a number of synergistic programs that are brownfield related, and some recent studies that have been done. Then we'll talk about next steps, and then of course open the floor up to questions if there are any remaining. So with that, this is just a quick definition. It's been kicking around EPA's website for the last 20, 30 years. Basically, a brownfield site is defined as a real property expansion, redevelopment, reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substances, pollutants, contaminants, controlled substances, petroleum or petroleum products, or as mine-scarred land. And I think one of the key features of this is the presence or potential presence, because oftentimes in communities like, Paisley, Lakeview, Lake County, and others throughout Oregon and really throughout the country, there are sites that have the perception of being contaminated to a point where they're not developable. Well, oftentimes that's just not true, and I'll give you some examples later on for some projects that I'm working on elsewhere. This is a table that I kind of stole from the EPA website. Was just published as of October 2018, and really the column that to me is important is the column farthest to the right, the cumulative program accomplishments. Under the EPA's grant, over 28,000 sites have been assessed, 141,000 jobs have been leveraged, and over $26.8 billion of private money has been funneled into the properties that have been assessed by the program that otherwise may not have ever been spent.
Can you elaborate when you say $26 billion been from public?
From
private.
Mostly private entities. I'll use an example like there's it's kind of a trail development in Atlanta where the city got an initial $400,000 grant to assess properties along this trail. That work was done back in 2004, and because of that work, the trail was ultimately constructed, and it's been a magnet for economic development, both mixed-use office, residential, and it's really turned things around in neighborhoods that you wouldn't want to go to at night.
So that $26 billion is money that was capitalized in to develop.
Exactly, to develop properties that were either assessed or what we see a lot. And there's another statistic that I'll bring up later, that if you clean up a corner gas station, as an example, and turn it into a nice little coffee house or small business incubator, whatever the case may be, other folks in the area whose properties may not be up to speed, the nicest to look at, see that and say, okay, well, we're gonna pump some money into our own property. And it's kind of a catalytic effect there. So, and then acres redeveloped or anticipated for or prepared for use is over 77,000 acres. So, it's a program, like I said, it's been around a while, and one of the things that I think is a testament to its success is just this year, the President signed the BUILD Act, which has pumped more money into the program. On the assessment side, things are more or less the same, but on the cleanup side, there used to be a cap for cleaning up properties of $200,000 per site, and that's $500,000. You can do a lot more for that if you $300 grand, especially since there are some programmatic and bureaucratic requirements that have to take place. But at the end of the day, things are going in the right direction for the program, and we're seeing that it's becoming more and more popular, and not just in bigger cities and rural communities like Lake County. In fact, I'm working on about 10 or 12 of these projects right now. Some are larger cities, but a lot of them are small rural communities that really have the need for turning these key sites around.
So Keith, when you said the Build Act, did this program used to fall under the Tiger?
No, it was a separate program. The Tiger was strictly transportation.
That's what I.
Yeah, but the Build Act, there's a brownfield component of Build Act.
So it's part of that 1.5 billion that
Yep.
was authorized. Okay, thank you. I didn't think that it was in it. in
Yeah,
the
no,
Tiger
it's,
program,
it,
so.
it was, but it's,
Yeah,
you know, we were very happy to see it come about, because for a while there, you know, there were talks that the program would go away, a couple of years ago. And I think that because it is an economic development program and an environmental program, there's kind of a natural synergy there.
sure.
So,
Yep.
oops, I don't know what that happened there. Sorry, there we go. So these are just some objectives, and we've already talked a little bit about some of them, but some of the objectives of the program are to return abandoned and underutilized sites to reproductive use, public benefits are to generate tax revenues, create jobs. I don't know what happened there.
You can just close it, please.
There, okay. How do I go back? No, that's forward. Back. Is there a way to go back?
If you right click it, it might give you an option.
Oh, okay. I just had crashed the eyesight.
Please stay with us, we're experiencing technical difficulties at this time.
Yeah.
It says next and previous on the second option.
Oh, okay, sorry. Previous, look at that. Okay, one more previous.
One more.
Beautiful. All right. You know, combating sprawl, revitalizing blighted areas, and addressing environmental justice issues are some of the others. There's a tie to sustainability, and in a lot of communities, there's the slogan, blight to right. And by assessing, you know, tracts of blighted homes, which is a permissible project under the assessment grant, you know, we've seen communities, you know, turn neighborhoods around by determining if there are any environmental issues, doing asbestos and lead surveys so that we can anticipate costs associated with demolition, and so on. One project we worked on, I worked on a number of years ago, it turned out the guy was operating a paint shop in the back of his barn, and there were literally 500 cans of paint, like 20, 55-gallon drums of paint that were ready to blow up at any time. If we hadn't gone in there, you know, God knows what could happen right next to a school. But we identified the problem, it was under an EPA grant, and EPA came out with their emergency resources and cleaned the place up, so.
Keith, just for the audience, so everybody has the same understanding of the address of environmental justice issues, can you elaborate what that is?
Yeah, sure. Environmental justice issues are, you know, issues where you've got a factory or some type of source of pollution in an area associated with like low income, et cetera. I mean, I'll use an example. One of the projects I worked on was up in New York, and it was a coal-fired power plant right next to a very poor area, and the community had complained about it for years, and nobody said, oh, there's no issue. Well, right after a snowstorm, the boilers basically belched, and there was about a quarter-inch of soot all over the freshly fallen snow. So that got people to understand that there really was a concern. So environmental justice is a whole kind of sideline item of the EPA Brownfield program. And it kind of ties into the community development piece that we'll talk about later. So every community has its own issues, and environmental justice might not be an issue here, but it may be, and it's something we can address as we move forward. Okay? That's right. Beautiful. Supporting economic development, we've already talked a little bit about that. And at the end of the day, brownfield projects are simply real estate transactions with an environmental twist. Banks and lending institutions require some level of site assessment and due diligence, and what this program does is pay for that. It's one way to look at it. Although you'd be amazed at I've been doing this stuff for 30 years, and lately, we come across deals all the time where people are just paying cash for things that they should never have paid for. So I think it's an education process for folks to understand that there is environmental liability and that this is a potential opportunity to, determine what the issues are. So EPA's brownfield program supports redevelopment issues really through helping communities develop brownfield inventories, completing the phase 1 and phase 2 assessments, and also through funding cleanup and planning efforts. There's a whole separate, and we'll talk about this in a second, there's a whole separate set of cleanup grants, but there are a few things that we can do with the assessment grants. Say you've got an old corner gas station that the tanks are still present, haven't operated in 20 years. As part of the assessment, you can actually remove those tanks, which may be the only issue on that site. So you're actually accomplishing a lot with assessment activity. Let's see. Oh yeah, like I said before, really, brownfields don't have to be contaminated to be considered brownfields because often it's the perception. And working on 3 large industrial projects now where, we just finished them up actually, where there was always the perception in the community that there was extensive groundwater contamination, soil contamination. And in every instance, we found that there was residual contamination, but the levels weren't low enough to require any remediation. So basically, the reports that we generated under the grant program, we turned over to the brokers that were trying to sell the property, and they've been able to turn them around because folks are a lot more likely to buy a clean or mostly clean site. So, let's see. Just some examples of brownfields. Solvent contaminated properties like printers, dry cleaners, auto repair to some degree, junkyards, hazardous substance and hazardous waste sites. And those can range from anywhere from, a large factory that once was a hazardous waste generator to, a small auto body repair shop that did a lot of painting and, had a less than favorable management practices. Other former industrial properties, private landfills, and to some degree public landfills. And there are a bunch of those scattered all over the country. So one thing that we've been seeing a lot of is taking landfill sites and putting solar power on them. Obviously, former gas stations and dry cleaners, or gas stations on auto repair facilities. Relative to those sites, what we've been seeing, there's actually a brownfields to health fields movement where you take, a gas station in a small community, which maybe have a footprint of maybe 1,000 or 2,000 square feet, but if there's a need for a clinic, it's not a bad place to clean up the facility and establish a clinic for a community that's underserved. And there's funding outside of EPA's program that'll help do that. So that's maybe something that you could consider up in Paisley as an example, or is if there's a need. And all of the redevelopment piece of this is really comes down to community-driven need, which is, we'll talk about that in a second too. This shows all of the grants that are available through EPA. SCOED's grant is an assessment grant, coalition assessment grant. As I mentioned, there are cleanup grants. Revolving loan fund grants are kind of neat. Basically, community receives $1 million that can be either sub-granted to not-for-profits or loaned out to developers at very low interest rates. And the community determines what the interest rates are. The nice thing about the revolving loan funds, and I'm working on 2 of them right now, every year there's an opportunity to get more money. So if you're showing EPA that you've got some good projects and there's interest in the program and people are paying their money back, et cetera, they give you supplementals every year. I mean, the application process is kind of a pain, but that's okay. Because usually you get a $500,000 supplemental on it.
And doesn't that money, when we pay, stays in there?
Exactly.
Used?
Most of it gets paid back. The sub-grants that go to non-profits, that's gone essentially. But you have to be strategic about that. You can only give out 50% on sub-grants. Most communities just give out 10 or 20%. But it really depends on the need in the area. And the cool thing about that programmatic money is that it can be used, the revolving loan fund grants are only for cleanup, okay? But that programmatic money that comes back, you can actually do assessments for. So it opens up a whole new.
It's more flexible.
It's more flexible. Once that program income comes back, you can use it for.
Can it be used for housing too?
Or is it just business development? It's just for assessment and so on. You could do studies like, or renderings, things like that. And EPA is pretty flexible about what you use it for, but they typically say, well, when the rate uses more assessment. The grants on the bottom half of that graphic, state response program grant, that's what funds each state's brownfield program. I think 35 states actually get money from the federal government to run their own brownfield program. Oregon being one. Job training grants, those focus on grants to do environmental cleanup work or environmental response work. It's a $200,000 grant. Typically, a not-for-profit applies for it. It's job generating, or what's the right term? Higher education or continuing education organization. Because one of the requirements is that 40-hour OSHA training is provided under that, but you can also do other types of training like asbestos and lead paint, all that stuff. So that's something we can talk about if you see that there's a need moving forward. And then targeted brownfield assessments. Each EPA region has a budget for communities that have like a one-off site. There's just one, it's a very small community, or it could be a very large community that just has one or two sites that need assessment. They don't want to go through the whole trouble of applying for it and administering an assessment grant. They can call EPA and apply. It's a very simple process to do an assessment of one or two sites. But there is a limit to that every year, and it's kind of competitive. So those are the different grants. This slide focuses on the type of grant that SCOA applied for and obtained. It's a $600,000 EPA Brownfield Coalition grant. And with that, the goal is to do, potentially do an inventory. Obviously, we have to do community outreach and engagement, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later, about the first meeting. Hopefully we'll be doing that. Probably have one meeting here in Lakeview and a meeting in Paisley back to back. And combine that with our kickoff meeting with EPA. Kayla Patton is our EPA Brownfield program manager. She actually is out of Seattle. She splits her time between EPA and Army Corps, so we're going to call her later today and try to lock that in, hopefully for the early part of December. Ultimately, the goal is going to be to do phase 1 environmental assessments on up to 20 sites, and we'll talk about that in further detail, and phase 2 environmental assessments on say 8 to 10, possibly more, depending upon the specific sites. That scope of those assessments can vary quite a bit. And then the reason I mentioned the $300,000 grants that are kind of highlighted in the top row, one thing that we see a lot of is once a community or organization like SCOA applies for grant funding, there's a catalytic effect. By that I mean, it may be that at some point down the future, down the road in the future, a not-for-profit may apply for a grant to do assessment, or either the town of Paisley or the city of Paisley or the town of Lakeview may apply for their own grants. And it's really, and I've seen this happen in a number of instances where you've got 3 or 4 different agencies in a community that hold EPA grants. And with that, you're able to leverage a lot more dollars, so every community is a little different. These are the cleanup grants I mentioned, when it's $500,000. Local governments and not-for-profits can apply. Let's see, the revolving loan fund, I mentioned that as well. It's up to $1 million initially with those supplementals. There's one statistic that EPA has on their website that the U.S. Conference of Mayors has identified the lack of cleanup funding as #1 impediment to brownfield development, which kind of makes sense. And as I mentioned, Kayla Patton is the project officer for Scope Project. This slide essentially is a copy of the organization chart for our team, and also highlights the coalition partners and SCOED's role. On the SCOED side, Betty Riley, the project administrator, the community liaison, and coordinator Ginger Casto. Coalition partners are, in addition to SCOED, we've got Lake County, Town of Lakeview, City of Paisley. I'm the project manager. As I mentioned, Adam Bonin, who happens to be on the phone, is our assistant project manager. And the goal of providing this organization chart is somewhat to identify the tasks, which we'll talk about in subsequent slides. But task 1 is project management and reporting, which is a key part of the success of the grant program. Yep.
Audit coalition partners, Lake County, Town of Lakeview, City of Paisley. The emphasis on the Lake County is county-wide.
Correct.
There need to be some governing body, and the only governing bodies per se is Lakeview, Paisley, and county.
Right.
So the county part is actually county-wide, all the way to Fort Rock, to Wagon Tower, Interplace.
Wagon
We have
Tower's in
some-
Harney County, actually.
Yeah, but we can still go there. I'm a commissioner of no boundaries. Take that from my doctor, so no boundaries. But just because we have 4 folks from the northern part of the county here,
Okay.
I just wanted to emphasize this is countywide.
Right. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about how to nominate sites for the program and so on. So, I guess, and we can talk about all the tasks individually because I have slides for those, but one of the things I wanted to point out was one of the boxes in the last box in the red is future funding. One of the things that we do as a firm is we help our clients find money. And although we do a ton of brownfield grant work, I think this year we're writing 36 applications. Another one here in Oregon and others all over the place. We're also looking at opportunities for broadband, for water infrastructure, for parks and recreation, and so on, throughout the country. So as things come up, we're happy to help put applications together, and we'll be letting you know if we see anything that we think you might be interested.
So, one thing that come to me, and I don't think you clarified, I've sort of been asked this question, Keith, is
Okay.
through this assessment and everything, one of the fears is it'll trigger people have to do cleanup. Is this, if somebody says, I want my property assessed, is there anything that could trigger that they have to put out a financial outlay to clean something up or anything?
There's always that potential, yes, and the phase 1 assessment and the phase 2 assessment are the 2 steps that you need to do to get to making that decision. And sometimes we've had landowners stop at phase 1 because during phase 1, there are 3 parts to that. There's a site inspection, there's environmental records review, what are they for? Site history review, and then interviews of community, the owner, past owners, etc. All that information is boiled down into a not so concise document that says these are the issues associated with your property. We would recommend doing some more investigation. And some folks say, okay, we're done. We don't want to know But at least they're that much further down the road. And I would say only 10% of the time that happens. Most of the time, we put a phase 2 scope together that could include anything from soil and groundwater monitoring to asbestos and lead testing and building to help folks understand exactly what the cost for abatement or remediation would be. Now, like I said, I would, at least based on my recent experience and, dating back a few decades, I would say only maybe 20% of the time you're testing to actually have a condition that is going to require immediate action. Okay? So if there is a soil or groundwater contamination plume, the state and EPA, especially if you go through the EPA assessment program, are very open to helping landowners come up with the most cost-effective and prudent solution to the problem. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of clarify is the cleanup grants are only municipalities, county development authorities, not-for-profits are eligible for those funds. However, if, say, SCOED were to apply for a revolving loan, and one of the sites that was assessed was owned by a private developer, then they could be eligible for, so a low interest loan to clean up the problem. So, one of the things that we do every day is if we do find a problem, we hold the landowner's hand and help them understand what the next steps are. At no point are we going to generate a document that says, okay, you've got to report by, because that just generates ill will with respect to the program, with respect to the community. So I guess, and I hope I'm not babbling, but what I'm trying to get across is that there's a way to work through the process that costs can be minimized.
Thank you.
No problem. This slide just kind of focuses on task 1. And task 1 is really the administrative side, the financial accounting piece. We do monthly status reports, generally in email form. EPA has a program called ACRES, and it's basically, I think you used it on your other grant. Basically, it's a way of tracking progress for each site. Each site that's assessed gets assigned an acres number. 9 times out of 10, we put all the data into acres for the clients and make sure that everything's as it needs to be. Quarterly reports, annual reports, property profile forms, the DBE or MDE reports, the closeout report at the end of the grant, and then coordination with EPA and Oregon DEQ, EPA, Oregon DEQ. Now, every project officer is a little different on how they want to see things put forward, but we'll do a meeting with Taylor to come up with exactly what she wants to make sure that there's no questions. Public involvement. This is a graphic that I came up a while ago. It just shows kind of the pieces of brownfield redevelopment. You've got community involvement. Through that, you're identifying sites and assessing them, leveraging funding from potentially private developers or other sources, and ultimately ending up with brownfield development. So at the end of the day, you can jump on this wheel at any point for any given site, but at the end of the day, you need all pieces of the puzzle in order to come up with a successful program. So under this task, we'll assist SCOED in establishing a local brownfields advisory board, which I believe is already underway. Attend and facilitate meetings, hold 1 to 2 program public involvement meetings per year. Like I said, we'll hope to do the first one coming up here in December. Develop and maintain strategic partnerships, disseminate information for the community, and host meetings with the applicants and property owners, which is key. I use an example. We were talking a little bit about how not everyone wants to know what is on their site. Well, in order to garner interest in the program, we often find that we have to meet one-on-one with the landowners and kind of almost provide this a boiled down version of this presentation and let them understand exactly, what the benefits are. There are risks, but to me, the benefits outweigh the risks. And the first meeting that we have coming up, hopefully in December, my goal would be to have EPA and DEQ there, so that way the interested members of the community can hear from them and not just from us, what their concepts of the program are and how everybody intends to work together to get from point A to point B. Task 3 is really kind of where all the work is done. I'd say 70% of it. The site inventories. For the purposes of the application, there are a number of sites identified. We've identified a few more. There are some who are ready to go to phase 1 now, so I'll be working with Ginger and Betty to get access agreements in place. In fact, one of the documents in this package that I left with you is an access agreement that would be handed out to prospective purchasers, and they would essentially sign and give permissions for our team to access the site, complete our inspections, and if it goes to phase 2, to actually install groundwater monitoring wells, take samples, etc. So the goal is to complete about 20 of the phase 1s, like I said, 8 to 10 phase 2s, and generate due diligence documents that are going to make a difference. The last thing that I want to do is generate a bunch of paper that sits on somebody's shelf. And it happens from time to time. But one of the things I think that you guys have going for you is you've got Ginger and Betty kind of driving the show locally, the ship locally. I think there's a lot of passion there. And I think with that we'll be able to move things along and apply for additional funding at some point. Cleanup and development planning is task 4. The goal would be to generate cleanup plans or analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, or HAPTAs, for up to 8 sites. And also develop concept level reuse plans along the way. The graphic to the right, this isn't my best graphic, but it's one that I had in the computer. The city of Atlanta, we assessed the site, and they said, well, we want to put a trailhead there for the belt line. So we did a little landscape rendering just to demonstrate how we could kind of see that coming together. We'll also be doing, as part of this task, we'll also be doing a housing study. Met with Darwin earlier, he's still here. And there's also a separate grant funding, an economic development project, and a housing study. So one of the things that we plan to do over the next couple of weeks is find out exactly what that housing study is going to do and kind of make sure that we're not duplicating the wheel and really build on that, or they build on us, however we see it coming together. But
This is where we're really placed with town of Lakeview and the city of Payson.
So, and then we'll put site marketing materials together. And then task 3 and task 4, we've got Anderson Engineering on our team locally who will be assisting us, and Daryl Skier, I believe. So as for the schedule, these next couple slides are really just tables that show how we see the program coming to fruition. We've got our project team kickoff meeting in November, which is essentially to some degree this meeting. We'll be working on the generic quality assurance project plan, which is kind of a work plan for the entire project. In order to do any phase 2 work where we're actually collecting samples, that plan has to be in place. And like I said, that's the umbrella plan. But then we'll have a separate quality assurance project plan for each one. We'll have a community engagement meeting hopefully coming up in December. Site selection period, I've got that going through April, but at the same time, there's a fair amount of money to spend here, and if we don't have enough sites selected by then, that can be extended. A lot of these are kind of moving targets, but, you know, at the end of the day, EPA likes to see communities where the money is being spent quickly. In fact, after 18 months, if you haven't spent 35% of your funds, they take it away. And one of the things that is a little scary, and we've seen it happen, not on projects that we've worked on, but we've heard of it from our EPA contacts. What happens is if the community doesn't draw down the funds, and it doesn't show as it being spent, even if it has, sometimes they still take it away, which is not ideal. This is just a continuation of the schedule. At the end of the day, we'd love to see the project completed by September 30th, 2020, which is a year ahead of the goal. And I really think that it's feasible to do that. We've already identified a bunch of good properties. We're going to be completing the housing study and so on. And I think at the end of the day, it is definitely feasible. This is just a little leverage vision that I kind of put together for every community that I work on. The first bar at the top is this coalition grant for $600,000, and then the bars is moving down are really just kind of concept level scheduling for future grants. I mean, you can see coming up with a cleanup grant for next year's round, another one the following year, maybe through a nonprofit, another coalition assessment grant if there's still sites to assess. The flip side of that would be maybe, you know, either the town or the county apply for their own grant. And then, you know, it's possible that, you know, maybe SCOA applies for a revolving loan fund grant, which could cover both counties. So, and it's just another statistic. I mean, this is a little dated, it's from 2016, but it says one brownfield, EPA has a statistic that says one brownfield assessment dollar leverages, you know, $16.11. I don't know whether we came up with that, but.
So with that being said, down through this leverage vision, all these potential grants and everything, they all have federal dollars attached, or they federal dollars, so any work done will have to be under the federal guidelines.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct. Yeah, these are all federal grants. Now, I will say, this is one thing I should have
when you
mentioned
hire a
earlier.
contractor or whatever, they got to go by
Yes.
prevailing wage, what we're gonna call it.
Right, prevailing wage is key. Davis-Bacon Act compliance.
Okay.
Which, depending upon where you are in the country, can skew things a little bit, but at the same time, it is essentially free money. There is a match for the cleanup grants. It used to be a 20% match. I think they're capping it at $40,000. And the revolving loan fund grants, I think there's going to continue to be a 20% match. Now, for the revolving loan fund grants, what we generally do is have the loan applicant come up with a match. So it's not like SCOA would have to come up with 20%. And it's really, as long as it's all up front and it's in the loan documents and it's blessed by EPA, that way there's no additional exposure. So if you added all that money up on the left side, you can see potentially leveraging over $50 million in private investment. Now, I know it might be a little pie in the sky, but at the same time, I think with focus, with vision, with dedication, it's definitely feasible. And, you know, there's a statistic, like, I don't want to bring Atlanta up again, but the Atlanta Beltline, I think that leverage dollar number is more like $50 per dollar. So, you know, every community is a little different, but at the end of the day, the goal is to make a difference. This slide here is just a summary of some of the Oregon contacts and programs. Our Oregon DEQ contact is going to be Katie Robertson. She is out of Pendleton. I reached out to her by email, and hopefully she can come to our kickoff meeting. Business Oregon actually has a brownfield funding program, and the contact for that is Karen Hamelak. She's out of Portland, I believe. And And one other interesting document that's out there, it's really a coalition or that was formed between the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, DEQ, Oregon Health Authority, and Business Oregon is a program that addresses promoting the reuse of Oregon mill sites. And given that a number of the sites that we're looking at are mills, I went on their website under their GIS map last night, and all of the sites that we're looking at are already in that database, but there may be some in other parts that aren't. And I think just reaching out to them could be a good opportunity to get some additional insight, assistance potential. As for next steps, moving forward, we've already started developing the generic quality assurance project plan. We'll hold the next kickoff meeting with the project officer probably in early December. And then the goal would be to roll right from that meeting and do back-to-back community engagement meetings. So that way they should be able to attend at least one of those. We'll be starting working on the public involvement plan. I talked to Ginger. We'll put a draft together and you guys can add to that, get that done in the next couple of weeks. Identify and secure access to properties to be assessed. Initiate assessment activities. Complete the housing study. We mentioned that. The goal for that housing study would have that complete by April for the next community engagement session, and we can present the results of that. And then develop cleanup plans and redevelopment strategies. And one thing I did put on here, which I meant to, was also leverage some of our relationships with developers and site selection consultants. And also identify the other grants that might be applicable. I know there's some new park grants out there, and ecotourism may be an option for the area, especially with the mountain biking trails and hiking trails and so on. One project we worked on was kind of cool. It was an old gas station that we redeveloped as a trailhead welcome center, and it's actually been very well received. There's it's a green certified building now, and gardens and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, we're here to help and kind of move things along. We're working with Ginger and Betty and all of you. And if you have any questions ever, there's my cell phone and email. Feel free to give me a call. And like I said, Adam, who's on the phone, will be working with me on this. He'll be at the next meeting. And we'll be working with Daryl and others to kind of move this forward. We do have the housing study is actually going to be completed by another team member, Bridge Environmental, Bridge Economic Development is the name of the firm. It's a women-owned business. Alyssa, never pronounce her name, even though it is Polish and I'm Polish, I should be able to. But she'll be working with us on the program as well. And we're looking forward to moving this forward.
Thank you. Questions?
No, just a great overview, Keith, a lot of information.
Yeah. And like I said, there's a bunch of information in this little package. Feel free to go through it. If you guys have any questions.
We may have some questions from the audience.
Any questions?
I just had a question. I'm
Sure.
referred with the town of Lakeview.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity to have that PowerPoint? So that
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So
Not a problem.
sit there.
Yeah, and there's more packages like this over there, so
All right, I'd like to share.
feel free to take them, so I don't have to bring them back with me.
Okay, thanks, I didn't see that.
Yeah,
Thank
not
you.
a problem.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a short 5-minute break, and that way if you need to follow up with anybody here, and then we'll get
Sure.
to our next item. Sorry for running a little late.
Perfect, yeah. Sorry, Ben. We gotta go back.
I do have to.